In this episode, we talk with Eric Rosenfeld, Chief Information Officer at ServRx, a pharmacy management company working in workers' comp and personal injury. We discuss how his team uses AI to process complex claims, reduce manual work, and support faster decisions without removing people from the loop. Eric also shares what he has learned about cost control, model choice, governance, and why AI works best as a tool, not a replacement.
Welcome. Today on the show, we have Eric Rosenfeld. He is the Chief Information Officer of ServRx. Eric, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.
Great. So, to get started, maybe you could just give us a little bit of background on both you and your company and what you do at ServRx.
Sure. I am the Chief Information Officer at ServRx. ServRx is a pharmacy management concern. We're really a third-party biller in the workers' comp and personal injury space. And by that, I mean we take prescriptions and make it easier for pharmacies to get reimbursed and faster than they would otherwise get. We also make drugs more available to individuals who have been hurt at work or just generally hurt in the case of personal injury. And in this, we stand between the pharmacy and the payers to make sure that the pharmacies get reimbursed fairly and quickly for those prescriptions that they are writing. In the past, and without our services, users went mail order or they went to various other means of getting these things filled and generally had to stockpile drugs because they were hard to get. But now we've made that whole process more simple and more direct. Patients are better served, pharmacies are better served, and payers are more or less forced to pay fairly for the things that they cover. You may know that workers' compensation is more of a property and casualty kind of business than it is a healthcare business. So it's very idiosyncratic and different than medical insurance, which you may be used to for your own, from your own experience. And we have created systems and processes and relationships that really simplify the process entirely end to end. And AI plays an increasingly large role in that.
So how long have you been with the company?
I've been there 6 years. And actually, I just celebrated my 6th-year anniversary.
So you were around then, presumably, for the very first kind of generative AI use case at ServRx.
Yeah.
Is that right? Can you
That is
walk us
absolutely-
through that?
We spearheaded that. We broke new ground. And I have the scars and the gray hair to prove that's that. Basically, the process that I described is actually quite complex and it's very multifaceted. Some payers are quite organized, others are not. And by payer here, I mean insurance company. In the case of the very organized ones, they tend to spit out huge volumes of information that are necessary to parse in order to actually accomplish the receivables. So they'll tell you how much they're paying, but they'll do it on a huge number of patients and claims all at once, and you have to parcel through that. So our first use cases were not generative. They were much more interpretive or agentic. And we started with that because, frankly, we had very quickly outstripped the capabilities of humans. We would get 20, 30, 40-page memos from these payers, each with a single line and sometimes multiple lines per patient. And a human would have to read it, decide what it said, and then enter the receivable, so to speak, that they gave us this big chunk of money and it was for all of these different claims. They would have to parcel it apart. It was a process fraught with error. It was a process that took forever. It was a good thing we only got paid weekly from some of these payers because it would take the entire week and sometimes longer for us to get through all of that. So the very first use case that we tried was to send the what's called an explanation of benefits, or EOB, to an AI engine and to have it parcel it apart. And it was 50% accurate, which was both encouraging and incredibly depressing, because 50% is a terrible percentage if you're thinking about stuff like this. You can't be 50% wrong about receivables. You have to be mostly right. So what it took us in that, we learned a lot about prompt engineering, and we learned quite a bit about other models, for instance, Textract, which are much, much more akin to document extraction and less about document interpretation. And in fact, much of the problems that we found were caused by unintended hallucinations. I hate that word, but that's the only one that's out there. Hallucinations of the result, and the need to get something out, I suppose, from the mindset of the LLM, to get something out as opposed to the right thing out. So we quickly pivoted and matured that to a Textract-driven process, which in some of the more advanced features of Textract, like layout and tables and so forth, are extremely well understood and very, very accurate. What we turned the LLM on was interpretation after the fact. So I have all this data that I pulled out. What does it tell me about this claim? It was rejected. Why was it rejected? I don't know. The LLM was very good at finding the causality in that. And that was really the second use case that we came to. So the first one had to do with interpretation and extraction. And then we built that process out to multifaceted categorization. And now we're actually very, very engaged in the business process outsourcing within this industry to accomplish things like records management. And so we've built, I'm sort of jumping ahead in the story, but we've built various layers here to help us do things for our constituents, in some cases our colleagues. We have built things for legal, as there's very often a legal component of personal injury. We've built things to assist our legal partners in interpreting and managing the caseload that comes from these injuries.
Got it. Got it. So you've built a whole ecosystem here. It's not just about your internal processes, but rather
Oh,
any of your constituents, your vendors, your partners, your customers. It kind
absolutely.
of touches all of them.
And it's expand. I mean, the ecosystem, I think one of the basic lessons learned for me was not to consider static system mindsets. As a developer, and I've unfortunately been at this for 40 years, right? I got a lot of gray hair I'm not showing. But the reality is I've been doing this since the 80s. And in that, our mindset was different. You built a system, you deployed a system, you enhanced a system. It was a finite quantity. And you looked at it as such, and you matured it as such. The world has changed in the last 6 years. I'm sure I don't need to tell you or your listeners. And what's changed about it is the level of dynamism in the processing itself. What used to be a deterministic algorithm has grown to becoming a non-deterministic algorithm. And at its face, that scares you as an IT person that grew up with information engineering and was actually part of maturing that technology. That scares the heck out of you, because if it's not deterministic, how do you use it? How do you consume it? We've developed processes for that, having to do with verification, classification, verification, human in the loop. And frankly, it's still not deterministic, but it's getting there.
Mm-hmm.
So we've built the mindset amongst the IT group as well as within the product structure. So for instance, we have built an orchestration level above the LLMs and the Textracts of the world that help us process, both pre-process and post-process, the results. That includes database verification. So one of the things that we built extracts enough information off of explanation of benefits to know what claim it's for, what claimant it's for, what date of service it's for. And once we have that, we need to check it. What, is that real? Well, how do we know? We check it against our claims database, and we've orchestrated that using a variety of tools, among them N8N. And once we're verified on that score, we know whether or not it's a candidate for a human in the loop review. Human in the loop is vital. A lot of people, it's funny, I just had this conversation with my COO. He's like, what if we could load all of the knowledge of our operations staff into an LLM? Isn't it feasible? Isn't it wonderful? We could just automate this. Yeah, he claims to have recently met an ex-adjuster for a large insurance company, and he was employed in training their models.
Mhm.
And he thought that meant he was giving his entire knowledge base into the model so that it could be used in place of adjusters. And I said, well, first of all, let me know what insurance company that is, because I want to be a little careful around them. That's a very scary thought. If you're doing it correctly, and this goes to sort of a mindset thing that I've got, if you're doing it correctly, AI is an adjunct, it's a tool. It's no different than any other tool we've afforded the business. Since the dawn of the PC, we've only been giving tools, various qualities, but nevertheless, we've been giving tools to the world. If you use those tools incorrectly, you're still not going to get a good outcome. AI is no different. And unfortunately, the shiny ball, which is AI at the moment, gives a promise that is false. And that is, give me any problem, I'll solve it. And I'll solve it without those pesky humans that you hate. Right? Now, I'm painting a rather negative picture of my COO. He's really a great guy. But the point is, you can't replace humans, and you shouldn't replace humans. That should not be your goal. Your goal, and our goal, has been to inform the humans so they don't have to do the scut work necessary to pull information, but present the information. Don't necessarily make the decision and make it immutable. Make a suggestion based on the inputs you've got, showing your logic, giving the background, and then enable the decisions. Well, what's this going to do? It's going to make decisions faster, which is the issue. It's really not a question that the decision is the problem. People make decisions every day. The problem exists in the expectation of the end user of hands-off capability.
Mhm.
And they get very nervous when they hear AI is involved. You hear now a huge a ruckus in the medical community about the use of AI in medical decision-making. And my response to that, and I get this question a lot, especially at dinner parties and cocktail parties. Eric, what are you doing? You work with AI every day. How is this not going to kill us? And I said, well, does the doctor killed you yet? No, it's another tool. It's used correctly. If used scientifically, it's a fantastic tool because it compresses the amount of time necessary to gain knowledge. But it doesn't remove the requirement or the dependency on human intellect to utilize that information. And I think a lot of people today are missing that. And I see a lot of AI failures in my networking groups and friend groups. I see a lot of AI failures that began, and I could have told you they were going to be failures to start with, began with that expectation. We're going to remove people from the process. We're going to make the whole thing automated. Yeah, great. That's wonderful until it doesn't go your way.
Mhm.
And there's no one to call. Here's the other thing about AI. You're not ever sure how it's making the decisions it's making. Even if you get the most verbose model you can get, you can't interrupt that thinking. You can't necessarily intercede. You can train. Most certainly you can train. You can exclude. But anybody that's done prompt engineering will tell you, do not try to get an answer by excluding things. Get a better answer by prompt engineering the inclusion criteria, the framing, the inputs, right? That's the way you tune a model. But unfortunately, it's an up and coming discipline. Very privileged to be at the early stages of it because I'm trying to influence the attitudes that surround it and that are fed by it. I know that's a longer answer than you probably
No,
wanted, but once I get started on these topics, I have a hard time slowing down.
No, it was great. I want to reinforce, I just agree with so much of what you just said that I want to reinforce a few of those principles. One that you mentioned is that these models, not only are they non-deterministic, they are probabilistic, right? They're making their best guess at
Hmm.
predicting what something should be. A recovering engineer myself, that is also a very scary thing for me. The other bit that you talked about was you have an orchestration layer. And one thing that people are missing, and you touched on this, but I want to double click on it, is that we don't have to use the model to do the whole thing. Code still works for a lot of stuff, right? APIs, it still all works. Use it for what it's good at, but then control the rest of it in a deterministic fashion, right? And that way we
Absolutely.
limit our risk of it going haywire and deleting the whole database or
Absolutely.
all these things you hear.
Absolutely. And I'll put one more layer on it for those of you who are CFOs that are listening. Since it's non-deterministic, your cost structure is dependent upon your ability to use it wisely, right? LLMs, they look cheap, right? Like, what is it? A buck and a half for a billion tokens, right? But you'll chew through those tokens faster than you ever imagined. So if you're looking to have a cost controlled approach, which is what you used to get with regular engineering, right? I mean, it might have been expensive, but at least you knew what it was going to be if you ran your projects correctly. With AI, the cost is not always so easy to understand. And in fact, the more complex the inputs become, the more costly it is to chew through them. So from a cost containment structure, it's vitally important that you're using these tools smart. Otherwise, your costs will be out of control. And I think a lot of companies have found that as they have, again, tried to overuse the LLM or over leverage it. And they wind up with a bill like, Cloud is now my biggest vendor. Claude, you could chew through money in Claude. I swear. How do you? Somebody once asked me, how do you make a fortune in AI? And my answer is, how do you make a small fortune in AI? And my answer is, start with a large fortune.
Right. Yeah. We're seeing that even internally here firsthand. I had to have like a meeting with my team about judicious token usage, especially when you start to get into these agentic workflows that can last for hours. Like, man, do the tokens add up? And and it's really interesting. You talk about managing the cost. That is coming up more and more and more. And I had another conversation about that this morning. My question: it's one thing about managing costs, but something that's even harder, in my opinion, is calculating the value it's creating for your organization. So I'm curious, you seem to have a lot of answers. Have you solved that one? Because it's kind of hard. But like, what are your KPIs? Like, how do you link like that big new number on the P&L with value creation for the business?
Yeah, that is a very emerging area. Here's the thing. We're trying to answer questions that weren't answered before. Again, because we're taking an additive approach. What's the value of time? If I can reduce the amount of time necessary to make a decision, whether it's how to apply incoming cash or whether or not to respond to a payer who refuses to pay or how to respond to that payer, if I can reduce that time and compress the decision making, that's a KPI. And we're trying to measure that. Of course, that's difficult because you don't really have a baseline. Nobody wants to say they spent all day on this one problem because it makes them look bad. So the baseline is kind of hard to measure there. What I will say too, in certain use cases, we're measuring the amount of additional revenue we're able to generate by generating follow-up messages to our payers based on their noncompliance or some other issue. So they hadn't paid X, now we got extra, so that counts as expected revenue, or however you say that in accounting terms. I'm an
Mhm.
engineer, not an accountant.
Mhm.
So, if I'm giving you extra money you wouldn't have seen otherwise, they are thrilled, right? So we're focusing on the stuff that's easy to measure. I know your users will likely comment, and please don't burn me in the comments, but we're looking for low-hanging fruit and we're looking for green fields. Because once you try to estimate the value based on existing workflows, you've got at least two pieces of friction in your way, two obstacles. The first one is the baseline, and the second one is the implication, right? Because you're building in incentive for someone to be a naysayer and to challenge your results, which is putting two parts of the company at at odds with one another. So I try not to do that. I'm trying to break new ground with all of this. So there's new incoming revenue from sources that we are able to help that we weren't able to. That's incremental. There's new revenue coming in from existing sources by optimizing the communication. There is reduced time to decision making. And that's basically as far as we've been able to get so far.
Okay, well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And I think I have yet to hear anyone give what I would consider a strong answer as to how, presumably you've given all your knowledge workers access to some sort of model to just like help them with their day, right? That's the one I haven't heard any good solutions on measuring the value creation there, right? Because everyone's
Yeah.
doing it differently, and we don't know if people are messing around or what they're
Well, I'm
doing.
pretty sure people are messing around. I've seen some stuff. I have a legal department that's very heavily using LLMs for briefs and summarizations.
Mhm.
In fact, one person even used it for his own purposes to help come up with a treatment plan for his aging and ailing father. You know, they're so varied. And I know people are messing around with it. We have given open access to it with the admonition not to put PHI or PII out there, and to make sure that they're using models within governance. So yeah, it's absolutely out there, but it's too new and too fresh. And unfortunately, it's like everyone was healthy before WebMD. I don't know if you're aware of this, right? There was no such thing as all of this ill health and wellness issues. And before WebMD, and before that whole ilk of web enabled or internet enabled medical information, everyone was healthy because they didn't know any better. And now that they know any better, they're sick as hell. And to tell you the truth, I find it hysterical. But information has a way of changing people. And it's got to work itself out. I think a lot of people are coming to the conclusion that they can't trust what comes directly out of the LLM, especially with the BDC and the, what do they call them, frontier models. I love that because, on the frontier, people died of like a mosquito bite, so like you don't have to be pretty sick to die on the frontier.
Right.
The reality of the frontier models are it's like wild, wild west. There's no governance. There's no prompt engineering. There's no structure. So if you're using it outside of the systems that are prescribed, I love you. I'd love to learn what you're learning, but you're on your own. And I think as a CIO, getting out of the way is principally important.
Mhm.
And we talk about this a lot amongst my peer group. Getting out of the way is very instrumentally important for two reasons. First of all, and this isn't just liability, it's you can learn from other people's mistakes. And also, you don't want to be the one standing in the way, right? You never want to be obstructive. That the train is headed for the end of the line and not slowing down, that, you're watching a slow motion train wreck, essentially. You keep that to yourself until they cry for help. And then you rush in and you show them what they did and try to help. But we've learned a tremendous amount from some of these things. My COO used an LLM to generate our very first generative output that should go to a payer. He had to do a lot of editing after the fact, but it was brilliant and it was a great idea. And he got there before everybody. Great, wonderful. Now we systematize it. Now we routinize and make sure it has governance and make sure it has security and make sure that we're using the correct inputs all the time. But that's the other thing. If you don't include all the context that you need for an LLM to make a reasoned decision, you won't get a reasoned decision. It's garbage in, garbage out. So long story short, I learned a lot from that. And it wasn't because I stood in the way and said, no, hold on, you can't do that, right? That would have been terrible, not to mention unpopular. You just need to get out of the way sometimes. And that has been very effective for me. And then when you learn what you need to learn, you approach it.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So kind of a bit of a follow on there, but you know, can you tell me one project or effort that was a disaster? Or if not, one where you learned that the tech just isn't there yet?
We haven't had any disasters because
Okay.
I don't believe in that. What we've done is a lot of learning. We've had documents come to us. We have a few partners, especially on our business process outsourcing side, where the inputs were flawed. And we had a lot of trouble and we messed around for quite a while until we got it right. And then we turned back around to them and said, look, some of what you want us to do here with these documents aren't doable. The information isn't there, or it's messed up, or it's turned sideways or blurry or whatever, right? That could have been a disaster, but disasters are when an expectation meets reality and neither are flexible. That's a disaster, right? The plane is supposed to land, but it explodes before so. That's a disaster. We never drive those kinds of things because, frankly, everything is always evolving. And with that mindset, sure, okay, the wing fell off. Can we fly with one wing? Yeah, we can fly with one wing. Let's do this instead. Keep turning left until you get there. That might be a horrible analogy, but the reality is it's only a disaster if you haven't built in alternatives. That's the great thing about this, because if it isn't working in the first approach, use a different approach. There's never, the story is not over until we write the end of the story. And because of that, there's no disasters. There's only learning. So, and in fact, in some places we court that. When we're training a model, right, and we're trying to create greater effectiveness or precision, we keep at it until we get the precision we're looking for. That we ever would have set an expectation would get it on the first try would have been our mistake, right? That's not a failure. It is a failure. It's a failure of project management. But if you take the right approach to this stuff, everything is doable. You just have to be relaxed about it. And you can't sit there and cry when things don't work. You got to keep working. Yeah. I haven't had a disaster because we just don't work that.
I like that. I like that. Failures are the best often tools for learning, and that has always been the case, and that remains the case today. So, to kind of start to wrap things up here, I'm curious, two-part question. One is, what's next? Right? Like, what is the thing that you haven't tackled, but you think that you're going to get there soon? And also, what does 18 months from now look like?
Wow. If I could tell you 18 months from now,
I know, right?
On a podcast, I'd be out there investing. I think the first part of that, what do we try next? It's dependent, of course, of whatever comes down the pike. We're working with many different LLMs. That's another thing. Don't get religious about this. You got to have the ability to test and compare. Think the ability to send workloads to multiple LLMs at once is going to be crucial. And then to triangulate the results, perhaps through a third LLM. It's not certain, and there is no framework for this yet, but there should be. And I think that's going to come down the pike. And what that's going to do is leverage multiple models. And it's also going to challenge the dominance of the existing Anthropics, Microsofts, Googles, because theirs will not be the only source. And they're all of them trying to get us to believe that theirs is the only source. Despite all the infographics about which one does what thing better, it's not the case, generally speaking, that they turn you in one direction or another. It's that for a given workload, one thing might work better than another. They're built on different inference engines. It's very, very likely that one might have different. You cannot predict that. It's very difficult to predict that up front. You can get some religion and try to keep pushing everything through one and measuring your performance. But as I say, that's kind of a slow motion train wreck, because what you really want to do is make sure you're independent of the technologies, and they're all going to, have to triangulate. That's, I think, what will happen next is an ability to multiplex what we used to, oh boy, am I old, that used to be called multiplexing. Look it up in Google, folks. You could try multiple things simultaneously and create simultaneous synchronous flows. And that's essentially what I think we should be doing. The other interesting thing is price performance on the various LLMs should be standardized, right? Everyone thinks they're not a commodity, but the commoditization of this has got to occur at a more rapid pace, so that the costs are not only controlled, but there's a competitive environment in which each one of these models becomes sort of levered up. So like if I do this better and I see you do that better, right, I'm going to try to improve against you, especially in that more open world. That would be huge. Now, is that absolutely going to happen in 18 months? I have no clue. It isn't there yet. I'd love it to be. And despite platforms like Bedrock, which are fabulous for having multiple simultaneous LLMs, there is no ability to send the same thing to a different endpoint or multiple endpoints simultaneously. Not yet. That should come, but it isn't there yet.
It's very insightful. And we work with a startup that I can't name that is looking to solve that exact problem right now.
Great problem.
So when you
Do me a
say it's
favor, after
coming
we're over here, send me their name.
yeah, that is coming down the pike, right? Like I see very, very early stage companies as part of my job, and I hear engineers talking about that. There's the added problem though of like, am I now tripling my token cost when I'm sending this stuff to 3 models? But that's another problem to
Right.
solve.
Right.
And
You don't
model
necessarily have to
selection.
send everything to multiple models. It'd be nice in certain very important things to be able to triangulate, as I say, but it's possible as well as part of training. You can figure out which model is best for which workload, is assuming your workloads are homogeneous. Then go that way going forward. But you should constantly retest that, because these things are improving every single month, sometimes more rapidly.
And new versions change behavior dramatically, right? And
Yeah,
if
sometimes they
you've
do.
got a version that's working for you, stay put. You don't need to upgrade. If that version works, we still use 4.1, GPT 4.1 for a lot of tasks, because
Yeah.
it's really good at those tasks, like
Yeah.
let's keep using it.
Absolutely.
Okay, well I love it. A little glimpse into the future where it's a bit of a wild west right now, but we're going to start getting serious about like efficiency and optimization and model selection and tool
Yeah.
selection and all the rest of it.
I look forward to that for sure.
I do as well. Okay, well, I think that should wrap us up. Thank you so much for joining us today, Eric. This was a great conversation.
It's my pleasure. Thanks.
All right.